This is Great FM. Great FM.
Hi, folks. Welcome to part 2 of the conversation that we've been having with Anurag Jain, co-founder and partner of ByTheBook Consulting LLP, a consulting firm that offers customized solutions to organizations in the areas of taxes, social security, and more. Now, if all of you tuned into part 1, then you know what we're talking about. But just in case you're clicking on this one for the first time, we're basically going to be talking about the new labor codes, specifically the 2 codes within that, Code on Wages and Code on Social Security. The labor codes have been in the news for a while now, mostly in debate about the effect or the impact that they're going to have on the current structure of business and industry in general. In part 1, we spoke all about the codes specifically because there is a lot of groundwork to be laid down in terms of understanding their impact. And now in part 2, today's conversation, we're going to be talking about HR professionals' response to these labor codes and how they need to reorient themselves to the implementation or for the effective implementation of these codes. Let's dive into it. Anurag, thank you so much for joining us for part 2 of the conversation.
Thanks, Anya. It's nice to be back.
So, bringing the conversation to HR, Anurag, what is the first step of action that HR teams must undertake to combat the changes that new labor codes will bring along?
Yeah, that's a very common question that I keep on receiving from my clients and wherever I conduct all these sessions on labor codes. So I always tell the HR professionals as well as the fraternity that first and foremost, understand what will be the financial impact of the new definition of wages, both from the organization perspective and the employee. And this also includes assessing whether there is any requirement for the organization to structure their present compensation components. Because a lot of time, what we are seeing is that once the financial impact of the study is done, then organization always tend to grapple that is our present compensation structure good enough to withstand the new changes which will come about in labor codes. So that is why we normally suggest that have a relook at your present compensation components that you're paying to their employees and see whether any tweaking or any realignment is required from the new legislation perspective. The second important area that HR should focus on is analyzing the impact of the codes from the current HR policies and processes perspective. And when we talk about the HR policy and processes, it would be from the impact of like leaves, overtime, working day, rest day. All these policies and procedures requires a relook from the new legislation perspective. And if any realignment is required to be done, then this will have to be done from those angles. The third point is around payroll policy and procedure. And again, this is something that organization will again need to analyze and see whether any changes are required to be done, particularly from aspects like payment of wages, what are the permissible deductions that the organization is currently allowing, what are the full and final settlement framework that the organization has structured under the present processes, and whether all these required substantial changes or minor tweaking to ensure alignment with the new legislation.
Okay.
The fourth important aspect, and which not many organizations I feel are considering, is around third-party contracts. Many organizations tend to deploy or employ contractual employees as well. And so sometimes these particular categories of employees are left out from the purview of the labor code. So what I'd advise the organization is to also see what will be the impact of the labor codes on the contractor-related compliances and whether there will be any obligations which will be fastened on the principal employer because of the new legislation. The last and the most important thing that they need to do after doing all this exercise is a development of a very robust governance framework for the labor compliances. And again, this is a part of the implementation strategy that the HR of the organization will need to understand. But again, it has to be done in a very, very phased, in a very, very step manner before they devise this entire governance framework.
Okay, so what in your opinion is a fair time period or grace period to allow organizations for the proper implementation of this? Because it can, if it's not done well, it can be very haphazard and unorganized, which is just going to be redundant to the whole purpose of the whole thing.
See, in my practical experience, again, it depends upon the size of the organization, how many headcount of employees there are, how complicated their structuring is. Because let's suppose there's an organization which has got a place of business only in Delhi, then it becomes a lot more easier because then the central rules or the state rules, there will be only the Delhi state rules would be applicable. But let's suppose there is an organization which has got offices in Delhi, Bombay, Hyderabad, and all the major metro cities. Then it becomes a tad more complicated, because wherever they have a place of business, they will have to align their policies and processes with whatever rules have been drafted or be implemented by those relevant states.
Okay.
So I would say anywhere between minimum to minimum, at least it takes 2 to 3 months for the organizations to basically do a full impact study to see what are the changes required in the policies and processes. Of course, the final implementation is something that will be done once the government notifies the effective date of implementation.
Okay, that seems fair. And, I do want to talk a little bit about the key changes that are going to happen at the workplace, and basically an on-ground view of, how these two codes are going to affect organizational structure. So why don't we start with the code on wages? What do you see as being the key changes that will happen?
See, key changes, if I see from the code on wages side, is the payment of wages are now required to be done within 2 working days. And even in the case of a voluntary resignation by the employees, the companies will have to basically pay the full and final settlement within 2 working days. If we talk about, there's a limit on deductions as well, which has been prescribed. That is a 50% limit on deduction from the employee salary, which covers the statutory deductions for income tax and provident fund. So wherever companies do a bit of deductions, it at any point of time cannot exceed the 50% prescribed threshold limit. The other important factors is around specific conditions for certain deductions. So wherever companies are basically deducting certain amount and there are prescribed conditions which are covered in the code on wages, then they will be required to send certain information to the inspector cum facilitator. If a person is absent from the place of duty and if the organization is deducting certain amount from his pay, then they would be required to send the information or update the inspector cum facilitator. Whether that will be done on an electronic basis or a manual basis, that remains to be seen. Again, if there is any unpaid wages that the organization has, then they have to deposit it with the Deputy Chief Labor Commissioner within a period of 3 to 6 months. And last but not the least is around there would be prescribed formats that the central as well as the state government will be prescribing for wage registry, employee register, and wage slip. So that is something that the organization will have to adhere to.
And what about, on the other hand, with code on social security? What do you think the main changes are going to be there?
See, on code on social security, though this particular code deals primarily with benefits like provident fund, ESI, gratuity, maternity. One of the questions that I normally get asked by the organization is, because right now, if we talk specifically from the provident fund side, provident fund comprises of 3 main schemes. There's a provident fund scheme, there's a pension scheme, and then there's a EDLI scheme. So the question that many organizations say is, nowhere in the code have they prescribed new schemes, whether the present scheme will continue or there will be a new scheme which will be drafted by the government. The answer to that lies in the fine print of the code on social security, wherein they have specifically said that once the code comes into picture, all these 3 schemes will continue for a period of 12 months from the date of the commencement of the code. So in summary, the answer is all these 3 schemes will continue. There's nothing gray around it. I think after a period of 12 months, maybe the government will extend these schemes, or maybe they will come out with a new schemes for this particular retirement benefits. The second thing is the different rate of employees' contribution to Provident Fund may be prescribed. Right now, the employees' contribution is in the range of 10 to 12%. So there might be a different rate of the employees' contribution that the government may prescribe to ensure that the take-home pay, as well as to balance it with the tax benefits available, there could be a different rate of employees' contribution. The third important aspect is around gig workers. Now, we have heard about this concept of gig workers in global arena. Now, this is something that has materialized in the Code on Social Security. There is a specific definition prescribed for gig workers, platform workers, unorganized workers, as well as migratory population. The purpose of these definitions is that the government wants to cover these category of employees under the social security regime as well. And if we talk about gig workers, what are these category of employees? These are basically those employees who are working on a freelance basis, who are not working in a traditional employer-employee arrangement. Platform workers, to put it simply, are people who are working or providing their services via some technology platform, like specific case, your delivery staff in Swiggy, Zomato, or that sort of companies. So that is what we term as platform workers. So the government's intention is to provide social security scheme for them. And so there would be a resulting compliance both from the aggregator side as well as the respective organization size to contribute towards their social security scheme. And last but not the least is government is laying a very good emphasis on the Aadhaar linking as well. And so in order to ensure that all these respective employees and the workers get their social security benefits, there will be a mandatory requirement to link their universal account number, their retirement benefit numbers with the Aadhaar. So that was the fifth change that would be pertinent for both the organization as well as the employees.
Okay. And I think, we started part 2 with this idea in mind, so we'll end it with it in mind as well. What do you perceive as HR's role in the implementation of these new codes? What do you think they're going to have to take up first?
See, I personally think HR, due to their proximity to both the employees and the relevant stakeholder within the organization, will be playing a very central and pivotal role.
Yeah.
Now, based on my experience with different companies, HR is primarily project managing this entire implementation with, of course, the valuable input from the legal team, finance, and the payroll team. Another important aspect is that the HR needs to keep in mind is time-to-time communication with the employees and updating them about the changes that the organization may bring about due to the new labor codes coming into picture. So I think primarily the role of the HR is very central, very pivotal. They will have to handhold both their relevant stakeholders in the organization. They will have to handhold their employees as well, so that whatever changes come about, be it in terms of the compliance, be it in terms of the policy and procedure, that is done in a very seamless way with minimum interruption for both the organization as well as the employees.
Okay, all right. Well, I have to say, Anurag, you have left us with a wealth of information. Thank you so very much for joining us and being our companion when it comes to the labor codes and code on wages and code on social security. It's really just been a lot to assimilate. And I'm sure, speaking about it, there's only so much that we can grasp, but we'll just have to see how this entire thing plays out in the future.
Thanks, Alya, for him.
Everyone, stay tuned. I hope you enjoyed part 1, part 2 conversation with Anurag on the labor code, specifically code on wages and code on social security. This is Ahalya signing off on Great FM for now, but I'll be back with more interesting conversations soon. Stay safe, stay curious.
This is Great FM.